interesting when you talked about the high impact hydro versus the low impact hydro, and the high impact not being classified as good renewable energy. I was working for a hydrologist about 8 years ago in Lakeview, and she was already involved in the relicense. The thing is, so much has changed. Yeah, so much has changed since the dams were licensed. Is there any idea what you would be looking at, or what you would be looking at, what you'd have to do to the 4 major dams to actually be able to accomplish?
No, that's a great question, and definitely there's a pretty good idea of what we'd have to do. So we started the process to relicense the hydro projects about a decade ago, and the way non-federal hydro projects are licensed in this country, they're licensed by somebody called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission pursuant to the Federal Power Act. The hydropower licensing process is considered by many the most Byzantine regulatory process in the United States. I have a friend at the New York Power Authority who tells me that he can site and build a brand new natural gas-fired power plant in Midtown Manhattan in about 2 years, and it'll take him 10 years to get a new license for an existing hydro project in the most remote corner of New York State. So it's a pretty complicated process, but we've been in that process for quite a while. The process, as you might imagine, has a lot of participants, a lot of different state and federal agencies with different authorities, and a whole bunch of steps associated with that regulatory process. And we're pretty far along in that process, and as a result, we have a pretty clear picture of what all those state and federal agencies are going to require if we want to continue operating under a new license. So we're looking at operating terms and conditions that, for example, fish passage is the thing we generally talk about most, in large part because it's the biggest ticket item. In order for us to continue operating under a new license, we would be required to provide volitional fish passage at those facilities, some of which don't have fish passage today. And so that means fish ladders, it means screening those intakes, placing barriers across the tail races, the point of discharge from those powerhouses, to make sure that fish aren't attracted up into those tail races and get killed by the turbines ultimately. And the capital costs associated with all of that is about $300 million. And that's fish passage alone. We're also looking at new operating requirements to better protect fish, wildlife, and water quality, and that in turn would reduce the amount of electricity that those projects can produce on an annual basis. And then there are certainly a whole suite of additional conditions to improve water quality, to provide more recreation facilities, etc. So all those costs together are pretty substantial, but we used what we knew was coming down the pike as a point of reference to guide the position we took in negotiating the hydro settlement agreement. Because ultimately our obligation is to our customers. I talked about those 1.7 million customers. If we know what sort of outcome we're facing in relicensing and what that's going to cost our customers, we have an obligation to try and get them a better deal, and we think that's what the Klamath Hydro Settlement Agreement represents. It represents a better deal for our customers, and it also represents something that reflects a whole bunch of other interests as well, and that's a pretty cool outcome.